in the 1950s when the peninsula actually divided. But since then, they've been a little separate, as Vietnam is very separate from China, too. We have a real ally there.
We sure do. We didn't, but we do now. Now, the president, before he left the White House, had this to say about the high-stakes Vietnam summit. Listen.
And I think we can have a very good summit. I think we'll have a very tremendous summit. We want denuclearization, and I think you'll have a country that will set a lot of records for speed in terms of an economy.
Brian, as you talked about, when the president, he famously, when he walks into these rooms, he says, I'm going to read the room, I'm going to read my opponent, I'm going to determine what's possible and see where it goes from there. And that sends a lot of people into a tizzy because they don't see a template. But ultimately, this president has done things, negotiated things that others have not. The establishment doesn't love it, but it's a wait-and-see moment right now.
Well, just think about the fact that they're not testing any missiles right now, and they haven't for the last 2 years since President Trump has been in office, which is pretty phenomenal. They're still building them, of course. It's hard to tell a country not to continue building their missiles to protect themselves. But for them not to test them says a lot.
Yeah, a couple of things. Liaison offices between the two shouldn't be hard to set up. Not former ambassadorships, but, hey, liaisons, a way of communicating. So far, the low-level talks have not yielded almost anything since the last summit, so that's a bit of a problem. However, there's indications from South Korea that North Korea is willing to deal about new denuclearization. What is concerning to some is South Korea is too compliant with North Korea. In fact, they said they'd be looking for a pledge to denuclearize without inspectors on the ground, which is a non-starter, obviously, from our side. But I think the next thing would be name a site that matters a lot, and dismantle it. And that's this Yongbyon complex of 390 buildings. That's the major source of plutonium. That's been in existence since 1986. Can we get some inspectors, and can we begin to take it apart? They have done some other things in terms of bomb making that is slowing down that we have picked up. We also know we like that dash filled in between 20 and 60 bombs. We'd like to know what is actually accurate. And we also have a great idea of what they're building and where it is. We'd like to know when they declare it, is it the same list?
Well, Kim Jong-un, he wants to have a good relationship, it appears, and wants to have communications and open dialogue with our president. But he also has to consider his military and what his individuals want in his country and has to please them as well.
Well, his grip on power is what he cares about. He's been willing to trample all over his people for decades, as his father and his grandfather were.
Doesn't want to look weak.
He can't appear weak. If you appear weak, you lose your job. What matters to us is, listen, we know they've developed the technology to miniaturize a nuclear bomb and missiles that could reach our shores. That's why we have to care about South Korea, but we care about our security even more. We can't live under a nuclear umbrella where they can threaten us no matter what.
That's why China.
That's why this matters. That's why these talks are important. That's why everyone in the meeting needs to chill out and give this president an opportunity to see what happens.
So you look at Japan, they say, Mr. President, we're going to put you up for, Abe says we're going to put you up for a Nobel Peace Prize. We look at South Korea and they say we cannot believe the progress and how Donald Trump has engineered us to this point. And it makes you wonder what the rest of the world thinks of us, or what do we think the rest of the world thinks of it.
This is negative, especially here at home and internationally. The Europeans and others we've been told they don't like this president, yet Americans see through that. And they ultimately say, listen, if we're putting America first and we're strong, our economy is good, our military is big, we see that as favorable in the world. It's because there's a reservoir of patriotism in this country that never gets accounted for in these polls. Ever.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also think that the European, when we had that meeting over in Munich last week, Senator Joe Lieberman mentioned, he says, I never remember such negativity towards America.
That's
and how down they were, how down they were about America's going it alone strategy, which, if you just listen, it's not going it alone. America first doesn't mean America alone.
Yeah, well, maybe you should build a military, Europe. Right. Maybe you should have, like, actual troops, and then you can have a say at the table.
And he's talking to all of you.
Well,
right? Just all of Europe, and I know you're watching.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's get down to D.C. because today the House is going to vote on a measure to block President Trump's national emergency on our southern border.
There's really not much going on today. Sorry about this. It's the first ever vote by Congress to stop an emergency declaration.
Our own Griff Jenkins joins us live in D.C. with more on the border battle. Griff.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, 59 declarations in history, 31 still in effect, but today will be a first. Speaker Pelosi explains why.
This is not about politics. It's not about partisanship. It's about patriotism. We would be delinquent in our duties if we did not resist, we did not fight back and to overturn the president's declaration.
But her counterpart, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, says the president is doing what's necessary.
the president's going to get the full 200 miles that the experts said we need on these barriers to protect us, to have the border secure. And that's what the president said he would do. And he has a responsibility as a president to secure our borders.
Meanwhile, in Laredo, Texas, where Speaker Pelosi just visited, they closed a bridge when a migrant wave attempted to cross, and there you see they busted more than $2 million in cocaine and marijuana. Now, as for that resolution, it'll go to the Senate next if it passes the House, where some Republicans in the Senate are already supporting it. North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis becoming the second, along with Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, that say they will vote to block the president. Guys?
Thanks, Thom Tillis. I'm sure North Carolinian Republicans will love that choice. I mean, that's the reality. Right now, we're debating, talk to Border Patrol agents or not, whether there actually is an emergency at the border.
A lot of conservatives say that there is. They call it a crisis. Our president calls it a crisis. But a lot of Democrats, a lot of the media say it's manufactured. Watch this.
There's no security crisis at the border.
President Trump must stop holding the American people hostage, must stop manufacturing a crisis.
The only real crisis that is at the border, which is not a border security crisis, but a humanitarian one.
This is a manufactured crisis, and a crisis that manufactured by the Trump administration.
It is not true. It is chaos at our border, and that's why. And it's been that case for 20 years. That's why George Bush got 500 miles of fencing. That's why Barack Obama got 133. And that's why this president wants to finish the job. He's got the prototypes. The 22 miles has already been financed. It's already well underway. Here's the president talking about why, for the millionth time, he says we need it.
If you don't have it, you're not going to have borders. You're not going to have a country pretty soon. We had a wall would save a fortune. Would save it just on not having to pay military. We didn't have that wall. It would be impossible even for the military to stop. Unlike other countries, we don't let people get shot. You know, we don't have people standing there with the most sophisticated machine guns in the world and use them. Many countries do. Many countries do. We can't do that. We can't do that. This country can't do that. But the barrier does it very simply.
I just laugh about those 58 national security officials who weighed in saying there's no crisis at the border and we shouldn't do the declaration. Those people basically are the people who voted for President Obama and the Republicans that hate Trump. That's right. To have Chuck Hagel as a Republican who says coming out against the wall, George Bush knows what Chuck Hagel's like. He turned on him the second the war went down.
I don't think that carries much weight, though, because Republicans could do the same thing. They could get a list of people who thinks it's a crisis.
Right. But a guy like Thom Tillis, who's a supposed conservative in North Carolina, and I mean, listen, it's a toss-up state, but there's a lot of Trump supporters in North Carolina. To block the resolution or vote to block the resolution, I don't feel like that's a great move for him.
You need 20 to overcome the president's veto. They're not close.
Not even close.
Right.
You know, it was
let
very
us know
close
what you think, though.
to us. Oh, I was going to try.
I do want to hear from you guys. Friends at FoxNews.com. Okay, go.
Brian, I was going to try an awkward tease, which is she's close to us.
No, so far that couldn't have been more awkward. So you're off to a great start.
Jillian, over to you.
Or maybe just leave them up to Brian.
You know what? I should. Why do I try?
If you want a lack of chemistry, this is the nonstop shopping.
Okay, so there's this terrifying and bizarre story happening right now. So let's tell you about this. An Amtrak train with 183 passengers is stranded and has been for more than 36 hours at this point. The train from Seattle to Los Angeles was forced to stop in Oregon Sunday night for a tree on the tracks. Riders say they're running low on supplies.
They just did an announcement on that they're making diapers for some of the kids that are on the train.
Amtrak says it's giving people food and water and trying to bring in a new train. The problem is the conditions are terrible right now. Heavy snow and downed trees all throughout the area are blocking the tracks and closing roads in that area. So we'll stay on top of that and keep you posted. Today, Michael Cohen will testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee. President Trump's former attorney expected to be grilled on several topics in a hearing that could last more than 10 hours. A public hearing in front of the House Oversight Committee is scheduled for tomorrow. According to the Wall Street Journal, he is expected to testify that President Trump engaged in criminal conduct while in office. Also today, voters in Chicago hit the polls to elect a new mayor in a historic race. There are 14 candidates, the most the city's ever seen, vying to succeed Rahm Emanuel. Emanuel announced last year he would not seek a third term. Election officials say these three Democrats are leading the pack and are neck and neck. If no one secures 50% of the votes today, the top two candidates will go to a runoff in April. Congressman Eric Swalwell admits he was rightfully roasted for this selfie. We told you about it. Last week, the California Democrat tweeted the picture saying, quote, "It's snowing in New York. I need coffee. The closest cafe is inside Trump Tower. This is me walking to an alternative." His post quickly went viral.
I was rightfully skilled about that on Twitter, and that's why I love Twitter, is that sometimes it's just a cathartic place to go where you can dish it out, and you better be able to take it.
Critics pointed out there actually were plenty of other coffee shops Swalwell could have gone to. So, hey, you know what at least he's saying?
Yeah.
In New
Finally,
York.
someone said I screwed up. It never happened. For Summit 2.0 with Kim Jong-un, the denuclearization talks are going to be in full swing tomorrow at this time. What can we expect? Fox News contributor Morgan Ortagus is a State Department press officer, fresh off another trip to Munich, and she joins us right now to tell us what possibly could happen today. Morgan, no one knows exactly, so you can't be wrong in prognosticating, but can you give us an idea of what tangible could emerge?
Well, if we don't prognosticate, Brian, then we don't have a job. So let me give you my opinion on what I think could happen. I think that we're going to see a number of incremental steps happen here. I really see this as a trust-building summit. I don't think that you're going to see some sort of major, end of nuclear weapons throughout the world. But a couple of things that most North Korea watchers will be looking for. One, does the president budge on economic sanctions? So far, he has expressed that he's willing to build a more trusting relationship between the two parties, but not willing to move on those sanctions, and that is clearly important to Kim Jong-un. The other is, do we come out of this with some sort of peace declaration? As you know, and we've talked about many times on your program, Brian, that is something that the North Koreans desperately want. The South Koreans are supportive of, but that is a very, very big carrot to give them, so we're going to need something in return for that.
Well, maybe. One thing we did do, the president said, much to the chagrin of many in the CENTCOM, I'm going to stop the military exercises. He said they're costly, want to show a show of trust there. So that's one thing that Kim Jong-un could say they actually got. He also gets recognition by seeing again with the world's most powerful leader. That helps, and also have a friendliness there. We also understand that almost everything in that country has been cleansed. Any anti-American propaganda written on walls or signs has been taken down, and nobody speaks ill of President Trump. Is that showing maybe the culture of anti-Americanism is beginning to be erased?
Good points, Brian. So a couple things. One thing, it's PACOM that's dealing with this theater, Indo-PACOM, not CENTCOM, which deals with the Middle East. But to the larger point here, what do we have to deal with coming in? President Obama's national security team said that whatever president had to deal with this, with North Korea, that was going to be their greatest challenge on the world stage. So we're seeing a real pivot, finally, a real pivot to Asia by this administration. I think the North Koreans, the Iranians, and others are probably playing a game of chess where they're trying to figure out if they can wait out this president or not. China, for example, does not have that same luxury. China is being hurt greatly by these trade sanctions. So we're seeing two very high-stakes negotiations with the North Koreans and with the Chinese happening at the same time. And so the fact that we're not, listen, in 2017, we were geared up for a war. Both sides were. And we had gone through decades of working with the North Koreans again and again and again in ways that just did not work. So that's why this summit is so important, because we were prepared for war. We could go back to that same war footing, but that would be bad for the world. And so that's where we are.
And Morgan, while China might want to wait out this president, North Korea likes this president and thinks maybe this is their best shot of normalcy.
So this man right there spent to buy everything at a Girl Scout cookie stand in South Carolina. He paid the troop, told the girls to get out of the cold. You know, I passed one of those stands in Minnesota. I should have done the same thing. That's now on the bucket list. Well done, sir.
That is so nice. You know, you can also send Girl Scout cookies to the troops overseas, too, on their website. Thank you so much, Pete. A bill designed to protect newborns against infanticide defeated on the Senate floor last night. Senate Democrats blocked the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which would have required doctors to treat infants that were born after failed abortions. Melissa Ohden is an abortion survivor herself and the founder of the Abortion Survivors Network, and she joins us now. Good to see you again, Melissa. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ainsley.
You are here today because you survived an abortion. Tell us your story.
I am 41 years old. I survived a failed saline infusion abortion back in 1977 that was meant to poison and scald me to death from the outside in. I actually endured that procedure over a 5-day period. On the 5th day, my biological mother's labor was induced with the intent of me being expelled from the womb as a deceased child, and accidentally, I was born alive.
How did you find out this story?
I was actually 14, so I'm adopted. My parents were told, of course, about what I had survived and that the doctors had a poor prognosis for my future. And so they knew that when they adopted me, but, you know, lovingly took me into their hearts and their home. But yeah, I was 14 when the truth came tumbling out through unplanned circumstances. And, you know, I'm the first person to admit, Ainsley, it was absolutely devastating.
I'm sure. Well, you've spent your life's work now making sure that this doesn't happen to other babies. Democrats blocked the Republican bill. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, I was there right outside Chambers last night when they voted. And, you know, I was disappointed. I still am today, but I'm certainly not surprised. I think the Democrats who voted last night against this bill really showed us that they're willing to sacrifice lives like mine to keep abortion on demand right there.
I mean, this is unbelievable, because this says when your child is born, in your case, it would be you being born, and your mom and her doctors could have decided not to provide you medical care. That has to really hit hard.
Well, and the Democrats continue to say things, right, like this is unnecessary. I mean, I'm living proof that this is necessary. And I'm actually going to be meeting a nurse later today in Minnesota who was there in the neonatal intensive care unit when another nurse rushed me in. In her words, she said she just kept gasping for breath, and I couldn't just leave her there to die.
And tell us about your life since. You have your own children. You're a mom. Generations are affected.
They are. You know, I have 2 little girls, 10 and 4, and, you know, I look upon their lives every single day and know that they never would have lived if that nurse that day wouldn't have been willing to rush me off to the NICU. You know, no child should have their hands left in the hands of their abortionist or a medical professional to somehow decide to provide them medical care. We need this bill not only to ensure we're provided medical care, but that there's penalty when there's failure to do so.
Are you somewhat thankful for this conversation? I know we were all, many of us were appalled when we heard the governor of Virginia say what he said about a baby being born at the very end and making the decision not to allow that child to survive. And we were all, most of us, many of us were horrified, especially those of us who are mothers. But are you glad this conversation is out there so that we can have a dialogue?
Absolutely, yeah. It's really unfortunate that we're seeing this legislation sweep across the nation and the Democrats block this bill. But you're right, Ainsley, it's a great opportunity to have a really in-depth conversation about late-term abortion, about infants who survive abortions. And, you know, this is just the beginning. That's what I was talking to the Republicans about last night outside Chambers, right? We're going to continue to have this conversation. We're going to continue to see bills like this introduced. And, you know, I have great hope because we have great Republican legislators who are committed to life. The president is so committed to life. And really, our nation is full of people who identify.
Hitting the streets of Vietnam on 2 wheels. Ed Henry almost hosted the show.
He jumped on that scooter in Hanau to bypass traffic. Said it was bumper to bumper to get to his show last night. And he made it just in time for airtime, thanks to that driver weaving in and out of traffic. Where's his helmet, though?
No helmets needed in Vietnam. One of our producers,
no one ever falls.
Exactly, and there's no insurance. Producers on the ground sharing this video showing just how chaotic the streets are in downtown Hanoi.
Has anyone ever thought of traffic lines?
There's no lights.
I love no lines. Just do your thing.
That's
you know,
amazing.
survival of the fittest.
What in the world?
I mean, I thought Boston was crazy with their traffic circles.
That reminds me of Kabul, Afghanistan. No, really, when there's no traffic lines, you just make your way.
Caracas, Venezuela. I've been there before all this unrest, and it was like that, too.
Hey, let's bring in Governor Huckabee now. He was used to be in Arkansas, where they do have lines when he goes to drive. He's a Fox News contributor and author of Rare, Medium, or Done Well. Make the most of your life. Hey, Governor, you're taking your life in your own hands if you're driving over there. Have you been there?
You know, this is one of the places I have not been, but I'm going to tell you, you guys are dead wrong about Sean Hannity and the scooter. It was not to get to his show on time. Sean has now bought in on the Green New Deal, and he's trying to just decrease his carbon footprint, so he was riding a scooter rather than taking one of those big cars like Bernie Sanders would take.
Right. The only problem is
you got to get it right.
Right, and I think he might consider grounding one of his planes.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to go that crazy. All right, let's talk about what Sean's doing there, and that's covering the summit. The president touches down about 9:15 Eastern time today. He said, listen, he said a couple of things. We're heading toward denuclearization, and number two is, I'm not in a rush. What can we hope for, knowing the president's got of two minds?
I've said this many times. This whole situation with North Korea is not an event. It's not going to happen at one great meeting that everything sort of comes together. It's a process because you have two countries, one of which for 70 years has lived in isolation, the likes of which we've not seen in the modern world. You have a president who in less than 2 years has accomplished more than others have accomplished in the combined 70 years in getting them to the table, having them sit down, and open the possibility of denuclearizing. This is a significant level of progress. Will it all be finalized this week? Probably not. But I think it's another huge step in the progress that the president has made, and he ought to be given credit for it.
Why can't our media here understand that very fact, that it is a process? It's not just about a photo op. You know, what Reagan did, as Brian, as you pointed out on the show, with the Soviets, took time, it took credibility, it took walking away and then coming back. Why can't we get our arms around that in the 21st century?
It's real simple. They hate Donald Trump. They just hate him. They can't stand that he's successful. They can't stand the employment numbers. They cannot stand the fact that we're strong in the world, that we're rebuilding not just overall jobs, but manufacturing jobs that the previous administration said would never come back. They've come back. They are just blowing up over the fact that he is succeeding, and they can't understand why. But most of us do get it because he's doing things differently than has been done before. And thank God he is, because we are seeing our country come back to life.
I know as a Baptist minister, you have spoken out against abortion. You're pro-life. We just interviewed a lady who's been on our show before. She is an abortion survivor, and she was on reacting to the Democrats blocking that Republican bill. Listen to what she had to say on our show just a few minutes ago.
I have two little girls, 10 and 4, and, you know, I look upon their lives every single day and know that they never would have lived if that nurse that day wouldn't have been willing to rush me off to the NICU. You know, no child should have their hands left in the hands of their abortionist or a medical professional to somehow decide to provide them medical care. We need this bill not only to ensure we're provided medical care, but that there's penalty when there's failure to do so.
Yeah, Governor, her mother went in for an abortion. It took 3 days of saline injections, and then she was induced and delivered a child that had survived all of that miraculously. And that was the lady we just interviewed. What's your reaction?
Well, I wish all of those 44 Democrats would look her in the eye and tell her that they wish she was never born. I mean, that's basically what they're saying with voting against this bill. And let me be very clear. Even if I was not a Christian, if I didn't have spiritual and biblical convictions about life, my gosh, I'm a human being. I'd like to think that we are a civilized enough people that we're not going to go the way of the Canaanites. I think if the Democrats continue on this path, they should rename their party the Canaanite Party and give credit to the Canaanites of ancient days. They murdered babies, but they thought they were doing it in their religious superstition, so they at least had some more noble purpose in their own minds than just their convenience and just the fact that they wanted to get rid of an unwanted child that maybe someone else would have wanted. I find this so appalling, and if the Democrats are going to base their 2020 election on the killing of a fully developed child, then I say let the games begin. And there are a lot of Democrats in this country, a lot of them, who do not share those convictions and are appalled by this new venture into infanticide.
And just so you know, Tammy Duckworth on the pushback says this bill is an attempt to bully doctors out of giving reproductive care. We know the partisan extremist playbook comes out of this, one based not in fact but in fiction, steeped in ignorance and misogyny. The goal here is obvious: to bully doctors out of giving care, to scare them out of business. And that was her take on what Ben Sasse actually introduced.
Yeah, Brian, there's nothing reproductive about killing a baby. That's where they've taken language and destroyed it. It's not reproductive. It's counterproductive to reproduction when you kill the thing that's being reproduced. I mean, that is on its face ridiculous for her to say something like that. And it's ridiculous for these Democrats to defend infanticide. And God help them for doing so.
Yeah, they love to talk about being on the right or wrong side of history. I think we know where they are on this one. Governor Mike Huckabee, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's hand it over to Jill. You know, has some headlines. Hi, Jill.
That's right. Good morning. Let's start with this. JetBlue is apologizing for honoring a cop killer during Black History Month. Look at that. The airline says crew members put up the display at JFK Airport in New York. It included a poster of Joanne Chesimard with facts about her life. One reads, Chesimard, quote, became the first woman to be placed on the FBI's most wanted list after escaping to Cuba from prison, where she was serving a life sentence for the 1973 murder of a police officer. JetBlue has removed the poster. Watch this incredible video and listen to the crowd's reaction when a circus stunt goes terribly wrong. Yep.
Thanks, Jody.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Janice Dean is outside in the elements with the wind.
We've got a little crew here. You guys are from the South, except Chicago over here, right?
Yes.
How you doing?
Yeah.
You know, 3.5 weeks till springtime.
Awesome.
Woohoo! Let's take a look at the maps real quick, and I will show you how cold it is here in New York City. That's the wind chill, so it feels like 13. Feels like minus 15 in Minneapolis. We have wind chill advisories across the northern plains and the upper Midwest, as well as the chance for a little bit of snow flurry activity. Gulf Coast, we're seeing some showers and thunderstorms, and then this big old system that's moving to the west coast, going to bring heavy rainfall and feet of snow across the Sierra Nevada mountains and towards the Rockies. Anybody want to say hi to people at home?
I would love to. Hey, my grandsons, Nolan, Miles, and my granddaughter, Liza.
All right.
Hey, guys.
We'll say hi to Brian, Ainsley, and Pete inside.
Yay.
Hi, everyone.
Okay.
Today.
A lot of spirit.
That's right. A lot of spirit.
Spirit.
Where's your spirit, Brian?
Still there. Yeah, I still got it. I'm literally looking forward to going
to step down. Yesterday, the vice president announced new sanctions against the Maduro regime, and he says their opposition, their oppression, it will not win over freedom. Listen.
I truly do believe that despite the brutality of this last weekend, where 5 innocent civilians were murdered, where truckloads of medicine and food were burned, that the momentum is on the side of freedom.
Debbie D'Souza was born in Venezuela. She's also the wife of...
To make a decent living, in essence, you have the elite government running the entire country, and you create shortages of food, which people in Venezuela do not have anymore. You create shortages of medicine. No medicine, and it's not a glamorous lifestyle.
Yeah.
People don't understand that. People are equally miserable, not equally well off. So socialism is not what people paint it to be.
Yeah, yet you've got candidates like Bernie Sanders saying breadlines are a good thing. It limits the ability for humans to flourish and prosper. Debbie D'Souza, thank you very much for your background and your perspective this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, well, migrant caravans marching toward our southern border for months. But one college's guest speaker compares them to Jews fleeing the Nazis. The outrage growing on campus this morning.
Of course, there's room for a debate to be had on immigration and on the migrant caravan issue. This is a very complex one. But it's not only ahistorical to claim that the plight of migrant caravan people is the same as Jews living under the Nazi regime. It's also offensive to millions of Jews around the country or around the world as well. And I think also this is kind of the new par for the course on the left, where if you don't like an idea or a person, you compare them to Hitler. If you don't like a certain group of people, you say, oh, well, they're on the side of Nazis in this case. And I think it's sad to see, and it stifles real debate.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and it's so political, though, because this is a public institution.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better to have a debate instead of just one view?
It absolutely would, and I think on many college campuses and around the country, many Americans are afraid of getting involved in these controversial debates because so many times on the left, they're accused of being these horrible people and they're accused of being Nazis for having differing opinions. And right now, the immigration issue on college campuses has been framed as you're with us or you're anti-immigrant. In this case, you're with us or you're on the historical side of Nazis.
Here's what the university says. It says the UW-Madison invites speakers with a wide range of views to lecture on current events. Jacobo Garcia is an internationally recognized commentator on war, natural disaster, and conflict who will speak on parallels between the Central American caravans and previous mass migrations during the Balkan War and Nazi-era Germany. So that's his point of view.
And it's definitely a good thing to have debate on campus. Again, this is an issue that should be discussed and debated, but I think that when you start with that kind of rhetoric, and that's the starting point, I think a lot of people are afraid to bring up questions for fear of being labeled that. And there are many students, I'm sure, that are asking questions about the migrant caravan and saying, well, look, I'm reading studies that show that the caravan can be used to smuggle in drugs and sex trafficking and other horrible things like that, but they're afraid of being associated with this kind of rhetoric. And also, I think it detracts from the fact we're a country of laws, and when you start at this point, you ignore the rule of law and the fact that we are a country based on borders and laws.
Well, and universities almost never put out statements like that in defense of conservative speech.
Like, they're all for free speech when it's defending the liberal point of view.
Let us know how it goes when the lecture does happen. I wonder if there'll be protest.
We will keep you updated.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
President Trump arriving in Vietnam just over an hour from now for his second summit with Kim Jong-un.
President Trump is heading to Hanoi, Vietnam, as he gears up for Summit 2.0.
We're seeing two very high-stakes negotiations with the North Koreans and with the Chinese happening at the same time.
Senate Democrats block a bill that would protect babies born alive after failed abortions.
The Democrats, they showed us that they're willing to sacrifice lives like mine to keep abortion on demand.
Democrats are going to base their 2020 election on the killing of a fully developed child. Then I say let the games begin.
This Green New Deal, it's going to cost $93 trillion.
Our planet is going to
is set to land in Hanoi in just about an hour for high-stakes talks with Kim Jong-un.
The president gearing up for Summit 2.0 with the North Korean leader.
Ed Henry live in Hanoi with what we can expect. Ed, good morning.
Well, guys, we only have one spot here. We call it the Hanoi set, I suppose. The bottom line is Kim Jong-un has now joined us here in this capital city of Vietnam. He arrived just in the last couple of hours. A long train ride, about 3 days or so, a couple thousand miles from Pyongyang to here in Hanoi. He is going through the second round of summitry with President Trump that will begin just hours from now. His goal is to try to get the U.S. boot, if you will, off his throat. Those tough economic sanctions, he'd like to see them lifted. President Trump's position is he wants to see steps towards denuclearization, which was promised in Singapore before providing some of that economic relief. What's interesting is with the president due to arrive just over an hour or so from now, Air Force One has been in the air for a long time, 2 refueling stops along the way to give you an idea of the distance. You have Democrats back home in the United States talking down this summit before it's even started, while the president has an optimistic tone.
Listen, I want the president to succeed, but I am deeply skeptical that the president, based upon his first summit with Kim Jong-un, is headed in the wrong direction.
I think we can have a very good summit. I think we'll have a very tremendous summit. We want denuclearization.
So we've gotten to the point that maybe you never would have expected, where you have President Trump saying, give peace a chance. Guys?
Yeah, I mean, let's just keep our fingers crossed. I thought we could be on the same page with this. You know, it's amazing, Ed.
And Ed, doesn't that say how important it is to Kim Jong-un to ride for 3 days on a train, 35 miles per hour to get here to do this?
That's a lot of small talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some say that it may have to do sort of a family thing because his grandfather took some train trips to here in Vietnam from North Korea decades ago and traveled by train, that maybe he wanted to retrace the steps there. Let's also remember he is very paranoid, Kim Jong-un, about his personal security because of his perhaps precarious hold on power back home. And so that was an armored train, of course, that he was traveling in, guys.
It's unclear whether they've upgraded the train since his grandfather took it many years ago. Ed, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
I wonder when cushion was invented. We have to look that up. I'm not sure if Edison had a role in that.
I think I'd prefer Air Force One.
Right, absolutely. But I thought it was interesting, too. I heard they had to evacuate the entire press hotel because it looks like, you know, they were, I guess they thought wrong when it came to what North Korea wanted.
Well, the traffic ban was unprecedented, too, in Vietnam. They blocked off the highway for a 105-mile stretch so that so he would feel safe.
Yeah, to your point, Vietnam didn't have as much time as other locations to prepare for this, so they're catching up as quickly as they can to provide security.
Although we did hear that Vietnam was going to be the site before before Christmas. So I don't know how much time they actually needed, but I guess it was officially done. So the big debate on the left is the so-called Green Deal. If you listen to Durbin late last week, a Democrat, not even a moderate, he came and says, I read it 3 times. It makes no sense. I asked Senator Markey, the co-sponsor, what does it actually mean? But that didn't stop Senators Gillibrand, Harris, Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker from endorsing it right off the bat.
Out the gates.
It's going to be extremely expensive, but some of those Democrats have said this is just the cost you have to pay to keep our country safe. And they're so worried about the environment, and they're even worried about people who aren't willing to work. If you don't care about getting a job, you just want to sit at home on your tail, we'll pay for it.
We learned about a new cost. It's apparently kids. You shouldn't have them. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she likes to put out videos on the internet while cooking where she talks stream of consciousness, which is a good way to find out how people really feel. This is her yesterday talking about climate change and your kids. Listen.
Our planet is going to face disaster if we don't turn this ship around. And so it's basically like there's scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult. And it does lead, I think, young people to have a legitimate question. You know, is it okay to still have children?
Yeah, so we did some math when we can make of this document. It turns out the cost would be roughly, shave $1 billion or $1 trillion, $93 trillion, or $600,000 per household. That includes some of the things included in there, the resolution sweeping jobs guarantee, which will cost $6.8 trillion. Remember, if you want a job, you can get a job. Approximately $49,000 per household that'll cost. Universal health care. Oh, yeah, that was listed. That's $36 trillion on its own. The cost of the 10-year transition to make every single building low-carbon electricity grid, that'll be $5.4 trillion. Guaranteed green housing, $1.6 to $4.2 trillion. And food security for every living individual, $1.5.
This is according to the nonpartisan group, the Congressional Budget Office. So basically, it costs you about $65,000 as a family every single year. And that's where you get the $600,000 per household because it's over the course of 10 years.
Considering our economy is $20 trillion, what they're attempting to do would bank